Hello and welcome to chapter 10 of the Modern Mindset podcast. No, that's not a typo. You heard me loud and clear. You heard me correctly. We are officially in the double digit club as we approach the 10th episode of this podcast show. With that mid season break that we took with 2 weeks off, it means that we also have successfully done 3 months of podcasting, which is kind of wild when you think about it. And I'm extremely thrilled with everything that we've seen come together. I got to tell you, this might be a good opportunity to kind of think about what our expectation was when we first started versus what it is in our first 10. From my expectation, I have to say that I didn't realize that we'd be able to pour that many ideas and thoughts per topic per episode. I mean, each episode goes anywhere from an hour 45 minutes to just above 2 hours. And listening back to the playback, which is something I love doing, it blows my mind how deep we can really go. I don't think we've given ourselves enough of an opportunity to do that. But I'm here with my fellow co-host Camille, and I want to get your thoughts on your expectation before we recorded episode 1 to where we are today in episode 10.
My expectation was pretty much non-existent. I thought also we would run out of ideas and that we wouldn't be able to provide anything fresh and new. But actually, I'm pleasantly surprised. And even when we have like a difference of opinion, the fact that we can even like air it out in a respectful way, I think is also very important, especially given the fact that we can actually do it in real time and actually show people what it's like to have a respectful conversation. Maybe that's refreshing to other people because for me, I find that super refreshing instead of having the polarizing extremes battling out, almost yelling on top of each other, straw manning, and all that. So I'm thoroughly impressed, and I didn't expect it to be like this, and especially when I feel like a natural progression in the way I speak and communicate with each episode. And I thought I would suffer from using a lot of filler words, and I'm getting better. So I'm just blown away with the progress.
Yeah, what you said there is so important, which is the way that we are with each other with debates and discussions and disagreements. And it's important to note to our listeners that the way that we are is actually the way we are in person. Like when you and I chat in person and we have disagreements or we don't align with an idea, we kind of go back and forth, and then it doesn't really matter whether we converted the other person or not. We just gave it enough of an opportunity to give our best into that perspective, and then sometimes it'll change our perspective, sometimes it won't, but we're at peace with that and we have that respect along the way, which I never actually realized until you just said it, that it's so nice that we're able to do that over and over on this show. And I have to say that by doing it with you as often as I do, I find myself having that same approach with a lot of conversations outside of the podcast show with other people when they have a different perspective or I highly disagree. I really try to set up the stage where I say, hey, give me some more of your thoughts around this because I want to see why you think this way. And then I'll say, what about? And then I'll throw in my thoughts. Like, what about this? How does that make sense? How does that make sense? And it kind of does get very interesting how you can have a very respectful debate and a discussion with someone to see where the needle gets pushed along the way. And I can thank this podcast very much. Being that we've been doing this podcast show for 3 months, over the last 3 months, there's a lot that's been happening with our lives. And part of it being that I've been finding myself getting a lot of speaking opportunities to speak at big events. A lot of them have been virtual because of the lockdown circumstance. But what was interesting is that without realizing it or being intentional about it, a lot of the things you and I talk about works its way into those talks, like the themes, the conversations, even like the debate that we had that may give me a different perspective. I sometimes share both those perspectives. So it's fantastic to see us really grow with the show. Where while we're talking about modern mindset, the irony is that I feel like our mindset's becoming more and more modern, one episode at a time, and I think that's pretty beautiful from my perspective here.
Yeah, I think so too. The fact that like again we're growing with every episode and becoming, I guess, more authentic because there's also that part where it's like I know it's being recorded, so I tried to put on a voice and I'm trying my best not to do that, and it's becoming more and more natural. And I think that, like you said, it's just our perspectives are evolving constantly, and we're still loving life, so you can actually see the growth within that, and even the change. Like the changes in mindset. Like I began like like studying different philosophy and psychology, and then I've noticed my mind shift into a different paradigm, and like I'm able to communicate that with you, and then a lot of times you provide me new perspectives or new ways of thinking, or you find gaps in my knowledge, which makes me curious about how do I work with that? How do I integrate that within me? Or is this even worth it? Am I possessed by this idea rather than actually holding it for my own? And again, it's just a beautiful thing.
It's also nice to, as we talked about in the last episode, which is the ability to think an idea through out loud. And sometimes I find myself kind of shocked, even from the fact that these words came out of my own mouth, because sometimes I'm thinking about it in my mind. And as we said previously, like sometimes we don't complete those thoughts. So we never really form a stable conclusion about what we believe in. But when you and I talk about it, I feel like it really allows me to have a good understanding of that thought better than I've had before, and an idea that I really feel like was I feel more solidified whether or not I believe in that idea. So a lot of that comes down to the fact that we're just thinking out loud in the midst of this beautiful conversation that we have week after week. You know, the first time I got a big taste of that outside of the conversations you and I have was an Instagram live show that you and I had a chance to participate in, where a fellow that I met through social media invited me to be on his live show. And it was because of that experience on the live show that I went to you right away and I said, "Hey, Camille, you need to try this out because this was kind of interesting." And this individual reached out to me and asked me to be on his Instagram live. And being that I'm in this kind of social media world where I do a lot of speaking, usually my Instagram lives are very redundant and repetitive, right? Like it'll usually be like, give us your best marketing tip, or how do I grow my podcast, or how do I get more followers on Instagram? And I can almost answer those in my sleep because I've done it so many times. And I was expecting this type of conversation because I didn't know this individual very well. I imagine he found me through my social media content. And when I jumped on Instagram live with them, I was shocked and taken away by how deep he was taking his questions and how different it was from versus what I thought it was. Starting with questions like, do you believe that the world is random, or do you feel like there is a bit of a system around it? What do you think happens when we die? Do you believe in God or higher power? All these other questions that I found myself doing something that I very rarely do, which is I stop and I think I had to think and I had to be like, what do I actually think about this? Because I don't want to say the wrong thing. And I even found myself saying stuff like, wow, I never thought about this. So let me think out loud. And I remember I was so fascinated, not because I feel like that I found something about myself that I didn't. I was more fascinated because I've given myself the opportunity to go into those philosophical sides of the world and think out loud. And I went back to you and I said, Camille, you have to try it out as well. And then you kind of went through and you answered very, very similar questions, but your answers were very different from mine. In fact, when I listened to it, I was like, wow, you know, Camille and I talk all the time, but I didn't know this was your stance. What does that feel like when you're in a situation where someone's kind of poking around and asking you questions about things that you don't always think about? And what was your experience like with that Instagram live? Did you find yourself saying things out loud for the first time? Did you find yourself being almost shocked by anything you were saying? And I know the host of the show was also challenging us and debating with us. So I'd love to hear your experience on that Instagram live when I asked you to try it out.
Yeah, I remember that very clearly because I was uh, I was kind of my ego got bruised there. I felt like I didn't do a good job articulating my own points and what I was thinking. And to be honest, I wasn't expecting conversation like that. So a lot of the stuff I felt like I was saying out loud for maybe the first time. And I thought I could have done better, but I think it was a great opportunity for the fact that, it made me really reevaluate the fact that if I hold a stance, I need to be confident in the stance I hold and not just say throwaways just because I can throw away like lazy statements or cliches that almost no one really refutes because it's like it's been heard all the time. And most people don't actually challenge people in the way they think. So it was a very positive experience in that regard. I did have to take a step back, and I admit I did get a little bit upset at myself, and I did feel like my mind trying to defend myself, being like, oh my god, this guy is just like nitpicking. He's not like accurately representing me, but that's not his job. It's mine. So like I had to fight my own ego there too. So it was a very positive experience, and I think more and more we should welcome that. It is uncomfortable, but at the same time, too, when you get poked around and you see what you actually believe and what you don't, and what holes are in your knowledge, then it's powerful because then you know what you have to do next, or at least you can kind of reevaluate and think, and hopefully you're open to the idea that you don't know everything. So thinking out loud, you might discover something new.
In your defense, the host of that show was about 300 episodes in, and he is like a professional debater, and he does like three of those debates a day. So we were kind of like unmatched, right? Like we weren't prepared. I felt like we went in without a weapon, and
Yeah.
and it put us on the spot. And I like the fact that you used the word uncomfortable, because that's definitely the word I would have used as well. I felt very uncomfortable that I didn't know how to answer, and the fact that he was saying that I was incorrect in his way of seeing, and he actually gave a good reason why. And I was like, damn, there's an audience watching this live, and I'm bombing, right? And you're kind of like taking it personal, but at the same time you're managing your emotions while trying to like get it together. I actually watched some more of the interviews that he did, and it would literally offend, like people were like offended and like go off on him during the Instagram live. So we handled it a lot better than the others. But then one of the ones that I was watching that he did with someone else, he was asking her like, what is the meaning of life? And she somehow circled back around, and she talked about a word that I'm a big fan of, but I was actually like bothered by the fact that I feel like she didn't defend it well enough. And she said like what she wanted to do with her time in this world is to leave a legacy. And then like the host was kind of like laughing, and he's like, let me ask you a question. Do you know what your great grandparents look like? Do you even know who they are? And then she was like, no, I don't know them. And she's like, do you see, like, people say legacy all the time, but we don't even remember like our own family 2 generations ago. So he's like, the point he was trying to make is that legacy isn't really as important as we make it to be. And I'm watching like screaming at the screen like, defend that, because I believe so much in legacy. And unfortunately she didn't, and they moved on, and that was kind of the end of it. But it made me think a lot about what I believe is a great focal point of this special digit episode that we're kicking off here, which is Modern Mindset Chapter 10. And what I want to talk about today, along with you, Camille, is better legacy. And I really think there's a lot of thoughts you and I have around it. And I have to thank you for actually inspiring this topic as today's focus, because just a couple of days ago you sent me a beautiful quote that you saw on social media that is very much true to what you and I talk about privately all the time. And I wanted to pull out this quote, which says, remember that when you leave this earth, you can take with you nothing that you have received, only what you have given. And I love that quote. It made me think so much about our purpose and what we do. And before I dive into my thoughts, because I have a lot of thoughts around this quote,
Mm.
you don't send me quotes very often. Usually what I get from you is hilarious memes of weightlifting, and how you and I kind of can relate to the struggles of going to the gym together. What struck you with this one that made you send it to me? And as you said so nice and elegantly, this is a badass quote. Well, what are your thoughts around this one?
Yeah, I loved it. I mean, because it's so true, and it's such a powerful statement to hear, where everyone implicitly knows this, that this body, this life is borrowed. We're living on borrowed time, and we have all these possessions, like, and we chase all this material stuff, but at the end of the day we're just borrowing it. And I think I keep stressing that word, because you don't own anything, not even your own mind. Half the time your mind owns you. And to think that when you leave, all that's left is what you gave, right? Whether that's a family, whether that's emotions to the other people, whether it's helping society out as a whole, or the discoveries you made that benefit everyone else. I It's such an important thing to stress, that we think all about what's in it for me, and what can I take, and what do I own, and my status around that. but really it's about at the end of the day, it is about what you've given back. I feel like you can't give back the life that you were given, but you can at least try to make the world a better place before you have to go back. So it was such a powerful quote that I think that uh, it's worth fleshing out. It's worth actually expressing out loud, and hopefully people can actually resonate with the words that it expresses in the way that I did, because it was very moving to me, and I think it's a very powerful way to look at life. It just builds so much gratitude too.
There's such an important feeling identified by what you just said, which is wanting to leave the world better than you came in with. And, I think there's a deep down human desire to do that in any scenario, right? Knowing that by you going through this tunnel, the tunnel actually became better because of it, not worse. If you took things down on your way through it, it's like, what does it say about your character and the fact that you were the X factor that either made it better or worse? There's a feel good desire there that comes out of feeling that you made something better. And sometimes it's in a relationship. You go into a relationship, and if it doesn't work out, you hope you at least made the other person better. You go through a company, and maybe you moved on from that path, but hopefully you made that company better on your way out. And being able to have that kind of mindset is a beautiful thing, because I think in many ways it gives you a sense of purpose. And in my career of being in marketing, and something that I've been with for a very long time is a marketing agency that I spent the last 10 years with. But the conversations I like having is when I emphasize the fact that what I want to do in this earth is bigger than marketing. And the fact that marketing has given me an opportunity to spend time in this virtual gym where I'm working on my skill set in order to go to the world and do the things that I want to do. I think, could I have spent all my time doing accounting? No disrespect to accounting. I think there's a need for that, but I don't think that skill set would help me get to what I'm trying to do with with trying to leave an impact, make an impact in this world. I think the skill set of being able to market yourself and use that skill to enhance my voice and bring it out to the right individuals, and promote it in a way that gets listened to, and create this community that allows people to feel free to throw their ideas into the ring. I think a lot of that comes out of what I've been able to learn in my agency life over the last 10 years. And I think that's a big part of it, is thinking about what is that bigger picture and what I want to do. And, going back to this Instagram live conversation that I was having, when I was thinking out loud, and when I listened back to the playback, as upset as I was when the recording ended, when I went back and listened to the playback, I was actually glad I articulated it the way I did, which is I love pointing out the fact that I'm a very practical guy. Being in the creative space, sometimes it looks like I'm being an innovator and a disruptor and someone that looks into the future and predicts. But the truth is, I'm really just looking at the past and seeing historically what made the most sense. And being that what makes the most sense logically, I start thinking that is maybe the best way to subscribe to it. And what I've seen over and over again is without a shadow of a doubt, I think something every single person in the world can agree on is that you tend to get more rewarded. You tend to get better rewarded when you're supplying to the world, right? When you're giving to the world. And that could be through you're giving more products to the world. You're probably earning more money. You're probably growing a bigger business and giving more jobs to people. You're probably helping out by supplying. And I see that there's a definite correlation that the more you are giving, the more you seem to be rewarded. And I started seeing that as my mindset of belief that I don't know what it is, what our purpose in the world is, but there's a clear indication that we're getting what we want by supplying and giving every single day. And to me, that has become a big part of my mental way of thinking, which is that I believe that if I endlessly give and pour into the community, I'll really feel like I've been able to do my purpose in this world. And part of it comes down to who I was in the past, which is someone who didn't get a lot of support and help. And that scarred me in a way that makes me want to supply that. I don't want to come off as a martyr and this like saint. To be frank, I also think strategically it makes sense to get everything you want in life, to be able to supply and make this world a better place. Is it so hard to believe that by you doing it, by you making this world a better place, that the world would be more likely to take care of you along the way?
Yeah, I am looking at it through so many different ways too, because my mind has shifted so many times over even the past 2 years around this. I I used to be very resentful for the fact that I felt entitled to what I have, and that I deserved more just for the sense that I'm special, and that that I worked hard, and that I feel like I'm deserving because I compare myself to other people that either don't work as hard or aren't as gifted in certain skill sets as I am. But then the more and more I realized that when I gave back to people, at least in the way that I could, which wasn't in any kind of financial or any kind of product sense, but more the service of especially processing emotions. I get so much reward out of that, and that's even with my own happiness and my own state of mind, and even the knowledge I get from that. I've learned so much just through talking to people about their suffering and what they go through and all the stuff that they suppress, and having that like bring out to life, or like bring to light rather, and being able to process it with them is not only cathartic to them, but it's also cathartic to me that I can feel a genuine connection to someone and make leave them off a little better. So it like the process doesn't hurt them as much. That that feeling that I could give to people, that peace, is what I want for myself. And I feel the more I give that to people, the more I get within myself. And it doesn't come through any direct means. Well, I guess unless you look at it through that way. But I mean, I don't get it from people doing the same to me. In fact, the more I expect it in return, the less I get. And the more frustrated and unhappy I am, and the more at war and conflict I am. So it's actually funny that the more I expect peace, the less I get. And through giving that to people, I feel like it's kind of my calling to keep doing that. Hence why I've been trying to like go towards these careers like law enforcement, military, and then now finishing medicine. Being able to help people heal, I feel is the best kind of generosity I can give. And I'm trying to express the importance of this because I think a lot of people feel like that they will lose part of themselves by giving too much. And in fact, a lot of people talk about that like you give too much, and when you overshare, you end up getting hurt. And I think just having that fear constantly there of being vulnerable and putting yourself in a situation that is disadvantageous to you, you might think it is, but it really isn't, because you're actually taking the first step towards something greater. You're chasing the unknown, in the fact that you're taking that risk of being able to be hurt, or not getting what you want to have, or even just having someone that's taking more than you're giving. And sometimes it's hard to have that boundary of being like, okay, enough is enough, and being like, I still want to be myself, my genuine self, and give as much as I can. The more responsibilities I take on, the more accomplished I feel, and the happier I am, even despite the fact that maybe the downside to that is I'm more tired sometimes.
And the part about giving doesn't just end at needing to be a financial support, as you did such a good job highlighting. All right, like there's that emphasis on a lot of things that you can give that actually cost you nothing, right? Like you can give them a helping hand, you can give them an ear when they need someone to talk to, you can give them a positive attitude or an encouragement, you could give with kindness. And what you said around the expectation is so key, the fact that you're not really genuinely giving unless you're giving without any expectation and no expectation of return. And it's only when you have that mindset that I'm giving and I may ask, and but if they say no, I'm okay with that. I'm not going to hold it against them that I gave them and they didn't give it back. And I think when you only get to that level, that it really allows you to give it from a level of kindness and down to down to your core, rather than the fact that you had this other hidden agenda that you were not willing to tell them about. And don't be fooled and don't misunderstand me when I say that giving does not mean like strategically saying like, hey, you should buy my product because it's going to change your life, so buy it. Like, and like I'm giving it to you so that you buy it and taste it, right? Like it's really about to the core giving, and there's a lot of different ways to do that. But when it comes through kindness, I think it really makes a world of a difference, because you start realizing that when I have no expectation of return, I can't be hurt, right? You get hurt because you were expecting something. Even if you were expecting a thank you, you're hurt and offended because maybe you didn't get that thank you. But when you have no expectation and you're like, listen, I'm just genuinely giving because this is what I love to do. And I believe that this is my calling. And this is in many ways something that I feel down the road will help. At that point, you walk away. And even if they aren't grateful, you're like, that's not why I did it, right? That's not why I did it. And you're prepared to move on as a result of that. And I've been trying to get to that mindset for a very long time now, where I believe that to a core, that being able to give, and then even ask, you may get a lot more benefit. And more often than not, I'll be honest, statistically, if you've been giving, there's a very high chance that you'll get some of that back when you ask for it. But even if you don't, I move on and you move forward and you're okay with that every step of the way. The thing I realized about kindness is that a lot of people expect it to be a direct transaction. I was kind to you, so tomorrow you're going to give something back to me. Or I helped you out with this, so I imagine you're going to return it back. And what I started realizing is that it's not a direct deposit or a direct transaction. It's actually a long-term investment, right? Like you're actually investing long-term and you're pouring into this world. And the beautiful yet dramatic side of it is that the return that you get is never what you expect it to be. It's never linear, right? It's not like, hey, I lend you money, so you're gonna lend me money someday. It's more like you lend someone money, and somewhere down the road, they saw you're opening up a business, and they brought in a client that's their uncle, but they remember that you helped them out, so they actually like really brought you a big account, and like something like that. Crazy things happen, and it's happened continuously my entire life, and not once have that happened as a result of me saying like, hey, if I help him today, it will pay off down the road. So I think that way of thinking, it's difficult to get into if you're coming in with the mentality that you're doing it to win. I think there's a reasoning that needs to happen beyond it. And the beautiful thing is you can tell very, very quickly who's investing it into it for the right reasons, right? You can see that based on how long they're consistent. You can see that on the hastiness of expecting a return. And you can see that on the fact that they just give up and change their strategy because it was a strategy and nothing else. So being able to identify that is important. And there's this common statement that we hear a lot, right? Which is like, don't mistake my kindness for weakness, I think is the statement. And I believe, I like dissecting cliche statements, because to me, I think about why did it become cliche? And the reason I think don't let kindness be mistaken for weakness is the fact that I think a lot of people make that mistake, is they think for me to be considered a kind person, I need to say yes to everything. I need to break myself backwards and like bend over backwards in order to help this person because I'm a kind person, or else they won't think I'm kind anymore. And I think that's the difference between someone being kind versus someone being a absolute pushover, saying I will do whatever you want me to do because I want to make you happy, and they become a people pleaser, which is not at all what I'm talking about. I think being kind means that you're giving to a point where you're also able to stand up for yourself if you feel like it's hurting and deteriorating your value. Because the truth is, if you're giving, bending over backwards, when you think about it from the big mission side of things, you're actually limiting yourself from being able to help more people because of the fact that you're bending over backwards for one person. So if you're really thinking about the big picture, it makes sense to say no if it doesn't actually add to the big picture of wanting to impact a lot of people. I think it was Oprah that identified that she wants to impact a million people, and she said this a long time ago, and I think she's done well over that, if not a billion. And it's beautiful when you think about it, because if she has a metric and says she wants to impact a million people, she's going to ask herself if this item that she's doing, this act of giving and this act of servitude, is it actually going to allow her to get to a million, or is it too small of a scale, or is it counterproductive of what she's trying to achieve? By having that kind of vision of what you want to do with the impact you want to make, I think it really helps you measure and make decisions on whether or not the action that you're doing pays off long term. and allows you to keep doing it consistently.
I wanted to come back before diving into that to the idea that when you're bending over backwards, you're not actually giving in a genuine way. I think you get rewarded when you're being your authentic self in the way you're giving. Because if you're doing it as a strategy, that's you adopting a personality to please someone. Where if you do it in a way that's like kind of righteous to who you are, your core, then that's where you get rewarded. Because like you said, you have no expectation. You put yourself out there and be vulnerable, and that strengthens the resolve of who you are and brings out more of yourself to the world. And that way you're able to receive the fruits of that. Because why would you want to benefit that strategy or that mask when you're giving? You want whatever you're aiming for yourself, not for that personality that you're throwing out there. I think it's important to look at that and be like, am I doing this in the right way? And like most of the time when we think about the cliche nice guy asking a girl, and they're doing all these nice things with the hope that they could finally find the perfect opportunity to ask her out, and then that way he'll finally win her over because he's not confident in his own value and he's not putting himself out there with her. I think it's almost like kind of the same thing because the way it is like you almost in a sense are bribing, I guess, the world or bribing someone in order to get what you want, but you're not actually giving. You're just trying to trick the person or trick the world. And when I think about that more and more, I become more confident in what I do with the things I say, and I'm not necessarily pushover too. I am vulnerable, so maybe it can be perceived like seen as weakness, but it's only weak because I'm at a point that can theoretically be exposed. It's not weakness coming from I'm not strong. It's more that I there is an opportunity to take advantage of me. However, I'm willing to take that. So at the same time, there is that kind of courage element to that, and that's why I really do believe in that statement. You know, don't mistake my kindness for weakness, because at the same time too, it is being vulnerable, but I'm not being weak. If that makes any sense. So, I'm I'm hard pressed to say that being nice for the sake of being nice is actually the same as giving. I agree with you completely. I don't think it is, and I think it's being inauthentic in the way that you give doesn't help. It doesn't help anyone for the most part. If you have to bend yourself, like bend over backwards, like you say, then you can't do it long term, and you can't even help the most amount of people. If helping the most amount of people is your metric, but at the same time too, when you give to when you again, I'm using give, but it's not the right word. When you're exposing yourself to someone in the hopes of helping them in return getting something for that, then it becomes in a sense you're lying to yourself and you're lying to that person, and it just you're not getting that person because you're not giving yourself as a person, and that's not helpful for anyone, I think. So I'm sorry because I forgot what you ended off the last thing on, which I wanted to touch on. So if you don't mind, can you refresh my memory?
Yeah, no, so quick note on what you were just saying, the that struggle of finding the correct word instead of giving. It's interesting you were struggling with it because I was kind of thinking in my head too, because giving, you kind of, if I said like, hey, picture someone giving, you're kind of picturing like a handoff, right? Like someone's handing off something, or it's a box and it's a present nicely wrapped. You're giving it, right? It's like a gift. But the giving component comes in so many areas. In my opinion, if I think about what I've given more than anything else, I think it's stories and conversations, right? And like I also talk about the fact that when we did this Instagram live with this host that challenged our way of thinking, I told you, Camille, like, hey, I didn't tell you anything about it because I didn't want to rob you of the experience. I wanted you to get the gift of the experience, right? And I think that's a important point. It's like there's other ways to give, and sometimes sharing stories constantly. You know, every time I get on a stage or on this podcast, sharing stories is going to allow someone to benefit from it. And you're right, you're putting yourself in a state where it may actually, it could hurt you. You know, I might have said things in past episodes that could get fact checked and saying I'm incorrect or I'm wrong. I might have offended someone with my way of mind setting, but I think about what I'm trying to do, which brings me to your question, which is the metric component, right? Like Oprah had that mindset of I want to impact 1 million, so she's able to use that to gauge. But I'm also going to say I don't have that gauge. So it's not to say you have to have a metric, but you have to have a north star of some kind to know whether or not you're heading down the right path. And I think that was my mentality around it. I'd love to get your take on how you know if you're giving enough or could you be giving more. I think that's what I was trying to really identify here with that metric.
I think your conscious will tell you, that voice in your head, if you pay attention to it, it'll say whether or not you're doing the right thing, or you're could give more, or you're kind of half-assing it. In the same regard, if you get resentful, then you know that you're doing too much. And if you're unhappy and miserable in what you're doing, that's also, I think, a good sign that maybe you're not in the right place. And maybe it can be something as small as the environment, or maybe even the person itself you're giving to, like, directly. But I think more and more, when I sit with myself and I do things like these new experiences that I try to expose myself to, with skydiving, bungee jumping, and hang gliding, it was it was almost like a calling to me, where I felt like I had to do it, not only because to conquer the fear, but I felt like it was a way to unlock more of myself, to kind of be more confident and grounded in who I am, because I exposed myself to theoretically dangerous situations where it can be harmful to my health and even death. But it's a very weird thing. Like, it's hard when you want to define intuition. It's very hard for me to come up with a good explanation for it, and because intuition is not the same as emotion, I find. And I'm becoming more and more aware of that, especially with my current girlfriend, where I just feel like I feel all these emotions, but there's something separate from those emotions, and this intuition that I want to be with this person. And it's not because I want to be with this person because of this emotion that I get, and she gives me a shitload of all these emotions. It's kind of strange if you can learn how to separate between the two. Then I think you have your North Star, your compass, if you will. However, to define what the difference is, I think maybe it's more when you reach the flow state and you kind of realize you've been mindless and you've been so focused, and it feels like it's at no cost, where it's almost free, that focus. Where other times when you're forcing yourself to focus and you get frustrated when you're making mistakes, which is natural, but maybe there's that part that's like that, like you feel drained at the end of it. And when you don't, maybe that's a good sign. However, I can't fully commit to that statement either. So I'm hard pressed to come with a definition for it.
This is a really interesting topic, and here we are thinking out loud. So let's see where we land on this, because I'm not sure how to answer this either. But I want to work on this a little bit more. I love what you said, which is the dichotomy between an intuition and an emotion. And while I'm just thinking out loud here, I think what's coming to mind is um, the intuition. I feel in many ways is that voice. It's a voice that's telling you something, right? And it's a voice that knows you better than any person knows you, because it's always been with you, right? And like, you may give me advice, but you may not know the whole story about me, or you may not know my thought process, or you may not know why I'm feeling the way I'm feeling. So although you mean well, sometimes your lack of information may result in advice that may not be the most accurate. Now, here you have a voice that I believe is the most well-educated voice that you'll ever have, right? No, even more than your parents or your kids or your significant other, because it knows everything. When you think about the definition of truth, it knows your truth to its fullest, and then it gives you advice. And I think the emotion is the translation of how you respond to that advice, right? Because sometimes, so a good example of this is guilt. right? And guilt is something I'll feel when I'm like, oh man, I'm so happy about life. I'm so happy with this person I'm with. I'm so happy that everything's going. But in the back of your mind, you're like, am I really? Right. And like, you're even feeling guilty as you're saying that to everybody. And, like deep down, you're lying because there's something that's telling you, nah, you're not. And you're kind of feeling guilt as a result of that. And I think the guilt is a translation that's letting you know that something's not right about what you said or something is right. On another situation, that feeling of adrenaline or thrill that you get when you're in an environment that then comes down to, will you have, and I love the word you use, courage, will you have the courage to take that leap of faith, because of the fact that everything that your mind knows is telling you through this voice that, hey, this is the person, this is what you need to do. It's kind of like when you see an attractive girl in a bar and you want to go up and talk, and the voice is saying like, hey, like everything about you, the voice knows that you're desiring this person. And then do you have the courage to go up and ask? The emotion is basically trying to play and figure that part out, and then you're battling it out with anxiety and fear and all that other stuff. So I think the translation is those emotions, but that voice is constantly there, that's active and there every step of the way. Which also brings me to the fact that I've constantly lived by this mindset lately, and I would say only in the last 3-4 years it's really been buzzing, which is, I never want my intuition to say I told you so. And if you think what that means is that I never want to go against my intuition and then find out that I should have listened to my intuition. Have that regret after because it didn't work out the way I wanted to. But it's only because if I listened to the intuition, it would have been the right move. There's been definitely scenarios like that. Like there was something where like I could have gone to location A or B and I chose B, but A would have been exactly where I should have been the right time. And or like I'm trying to make decisions and the voice in my head is saying this is what you should have done, what you should do, and I don't listen to it and I regret it. It has happened to me financially. It has happened to me with relationships in my life. It has happened to me with just being in the right place at the right time. And over again, I've experienced in my life where I feel like, man, I should have listened to my as we call it, I should have listened to my guts or my body or my heart or my soul, like whatever people define it as. I think that is what it comes down to. I'm curious as we're playing this game of thinking out loud. Do you agree or do you have other thoughts around it?
Like with everything, is so complicated because for me, I also agree. Like the person who you are, there's a very interesting. I think it's called. There's a Sanskrit word called nadi, and I think it's not that. So the Buddhists like to repeat nadi nadi when it comes to who you are as a person, and what that means is if you can point to something and say that's me, like who I am is a doctor. No, it's not that. Who I am is kind. No, it's not that. Any kind of label you can say of yourself, that is not you, and that's very important because the words you use. I'm happy, that's not me. I'm sad, that's not me. So it's separate from those emotions. And the person like you described, this is a person that knows everything about you because that has been the person that has observed your whole life. And sometimes you can tap into that, and when you can, it's like you're on fire, like everything lights on. It's absolutely amazing. Everything feels natural and automatic, feels like effortless. And so now here comes the problem I have is that, for instance, my upbringing and the way that I learned is through shame. So shame just comes naturally to me, and shame even comes when I listen to that voice or when I don't. Or it can be secondary to almost anything. And I've had to unlearn how to, well, not unlearn, but I had to learn how to manage that shame. So I know that naturally shame is a consequence of whatever it is I do, that maybe I feel bad for the person because I didn't uh, sorry, bend over backwards for this person. And then because of that, I feel ashamed that I didn't sacrifice who I am for this person. And that's literally something I struggle with. So it becomes complicated as well when you have these thoughts in your head. It's like, maybe I should do that, or maybe I shouldn't. And then it goes, what if thoughts? And then, like, that's also anxiety. So then that's also not you. And it becomes very hard to separate that when we make statements like that. But you're, like, at the same time, you're right, because it is this general, like, feeling, almost this gut feeling that, that this is the right move. And I think That's what I realize. When I can say that I'm going to do this, and then if I feel at peace and I say to myself, or like the words that naturally come to translate that is, this feels right. I think that's the closest way I can define like intuition for me.
Yeah. Let me ask you a question, because you talked about this a lot in the last chapter when we really dove into meditation and what it allows you to do, which is taking the position as the observer and separating yourself from your thoughts. And you're kind of like observing these thoughts. And part of me wonders if there's a very, very strong bridge in what you're saying now. So if I bring back that definition of like, hey, you are kind of like the observer looking at the thoughts, you aren't your thoughts. Could it be that the intuition is exactly that, that you tapped into that side of you that is disconnecting emotions and thoughts and making a decision? There's a common phrase that I'm a big fan of, which is unbecome, very similar to unlearn, but unbecome, which is getting rid of all the filters and conditioning that's happened over the years that made you into something that you are now, but you're unbecoming and going back to who you truly were down to the core. Could it be that when the intuition is speaking, it is A, the observer, which is you, or B, it is the opportunity to listen to the core side of you as if you unbecame in that moment, right? Like as if like you almost heard the voice beyond the emotions and beyond the conditioning because of the fact that it was louder at that moment. So imagine like a crowd of voices, and once in a while you get to hear that because it's a little bit louder than the others. Do you feel like there's any validity to those based on what you said last week?
Absolutely. I think the observer, like the one I described, that's who you are. And when you can tap into that, and when it can actually speak, then that's perfect. That's exactly what I believe is intuition. But then you're also right, because it is what I feel like. Once you unlearn your cognitive biases, your presuppositions, your upbringing, and what society, like how to function as a productive member of society, like once you put that to the side and you can make a decision without that, I think that's you. And that's what intuition is. Like emotions at the same time too is like this internal stimulus that you can't control either. And a lot of that can be learned, and that's what where it becomes difficult for me as well, because they can be a good driver for that too. But then I wonder, like, the fear response is like this modification where you're not, where when it turns on, you actually have tunnel vision, and you can't listen to all this other information, have all these inputs that would give you the most information to create the decision. So at the same time, you're hyper focused on one thing, and then it becomes challenging to think like, what if in that moment you can also somehow have that intuition there, because sometimes it can feel that way, but maybe it's just modified through an anger or fear response, such that you don't actually hear it. And this is where like I'm having a hard time like differentiating between like these internal emotions that are primary rather than secondary learned ones. Because like for me again, like I described shame, for instance, that's like a secondary, that's a learned emotion for me when it comes to certain things, and of course there's a primary as well for a lot of things, and that we learn shame, or we feel shame when we know that we don't act in a way that is productive to society, I feel. And or when we even betray ourselves, that would be a better example of primary. When we betray ourselves, we feel shame. So there's also, it's also hard to say whether or not that's intuition or a response to the intuition screaming at you, you're doing the wrong thing. And I think that's where kind of like the conversation gets very, very murky.
This is also where gaining knowledge and more wisdom is really, really important, because it gives you the opportunity to tap into what to do with that information, right? Like there's so many debates around intuition, and a big part of the debate is that some people heavily will argue that intuition is always right and you should always do it. And even though you may not always see the answer right away, somewhere down the road it pays off. So imagine like you go to the casino and you're playing at the roulette table and your intuition says red, and you bet red and you lost, some might say like, hey, I guess it wasn't right. But then there's that whole mindset of like, but what did you learn? Maybe I shouldn't have gambled my money away, right? Maybe I should have done something smarter with my money. Maybe I was meant to lose to learn that lesson. So like there's a bigger discussion about what the voice is trying to teach you, which is the bigger lesson. But if you don't have the wisdom or the ability to do critical thinking to dissect the takeaway from that, I think you'd really lose out on the opportunity, and you may repeat these errors, if not in the roulette table, in some other scenario where you could have chosen a worse or a worser situation and you chose the worser one. So I think there's just a lot of opportunity there to get into it. And I have to honestly credit intuition for what I think is why I am where I am in my life right now, which is probably at the happiest I've ever been in my life. And I think a lot of it came down to the fact that a lot of the decisions I made was probably the unpopular decision. It wouldn't be what my parents would have recommended in situation. It wouldn't be what many of my friends would have recommended. It wouldn't be what many of my what I call professionals in this space would have recommended. But I kept doing what I believed to be true. And I think only now, being that at the age 35, that I'm really starting to see it all come together, which is why I can look back and be a lot more confident. But at the same time, not sure if I'm confident to say this would be the case for everybody. So I'm kind of torn between the two. But when it comes to sharing my experience, I can honestly say it was going all in on the intuition. And even when things didn't always show the right answer, I've ended up through some bad relationships by trusting my intuition, but it was through those bad relationships that I'm in my best relationship. So again, I was glad I went through that tunnel in order to come out better. So there's a lot of interesting things there. And it's almost worth really talking about intuition around legacy, because I also think of by the decisions, and when we use the word unbecome and unlearning, it's like at the end of the day, what you leave behind and the statement that you make and who you are remembered as at the end of the day was kind of these decisions that you made every step of the way, right? Like you could choose to being like not listen to the voice and saying I'm doing it for this reason and really push back against your body, even though every emotion is trying to hold you back. And you may not get the outcome you want, but you may also be remembered as the person that resulted in that outcome. And to me, that part is such an important part of me. Like I really want to be remembered as someone that pushed against all of it. And I'll tell you, one of the biggest things that I really want, that I truly believe in, is the fact that I think you can live an incredible life by being kind every step of the way. And I can't tell you how much that means to me, because I was raised under a household where, kindness wasn't always the hot topic. Sometimes you had to be ruthless. Sometimes, I find this to be very common in our world, where for some reason, when you're looking at people socializing and making small talk, the only way they can really do that is by down talking each other. They call it chirping, ripping on each other, insulting each other. And to them, that's kind of like, oh, we're making conversation. Or the fact that you need to step on toes to get to the top or achieve your goal. The fact that you have to burn bridges and talk negatively. My girlfriend Priya and I were just we went to a McDonald's earlier today to grab an iced coffee. And she had to use the washroom. And as I was waiting for her to come back out, I saw two incidents that happened back to back while I was waiting for her. One of them was an elderly man that stormed up to the front counter and complained that they put bacon in his breakfast sandwich. And he was going off on her. Like you would think he had the worst day of his life. And he was going off on her and saying, and he was like, listen, I wanted egg, lettuce, tomato, cheese, no bacon, no bacon. And the lady was like, listen, I'll make you another one, but we don't have tomatoes. I'll guarantee you, I'll overlook it to make sure there's no bacon on it, but we don't have tomatoes. And he's like, give me my money back. I don't want anything. Like, just because they didn't have tomatoes, he like completely ruined his day. And at the same time, he's going off. Side by side, right beside him, another guy comes up and said, I was in the drive-thru. You told me to pull aside. I've been waiting for 5 minutes. No one is coming up to my window. Like, what? I don't have time to waste. And I'm thinking, like, how bad is your day going? Or how bad are things that you need to amplify this and to get your problem solved? Right? The fact that you thought this was the only way to get what you wanted to, and these poor servers are getting berated. They might have made a mistake. They might have not been great at their job, but to get treated that way, it really hurt me right down to the soul. And I see this happening all the time. And it's interesting because on the drive back with Priya, she was saying something, she said something that I thought was interesting. And I'm even curious to get your thoughts on it, which is, she said, I think there's something going on with this whole lockdown that is making people all grumpy and act this way. Because I was telling her the story while she was in that, like when she came back from the bathroom, and she's saying like, she's like, is it just me, or is this happening everywhere? Like people are just going nuts because of the lockdown. And I said, no, I don't think that's the case. I think it's because since we've been dating, like we both really had a we really increased our level of positive outlook. And now that we're thinking more positively, we're starting to be more aware of how much negative is around us. And I'm like, I've always seen this. This has always been a problem since I was alive. You know, I've always been seeing this everywhere I go. The amount of negativity and ruthlessness and the insulting, inappropriate behavior. The fact that you need to be mean and negative and rude and disgusting sometimes to other people to get ahead, it blows my mind how often that happens. And I'm curious to get your thoughts on that. Like, do you think what she's saying, have you been noticing that as well, or is that just something you're noticing everywhere? Because I was kind of taken away by how much was happening in the few minutes that I was there.
For me, I found it's been the opposite. I felt like since like COVID, everything has been more, everyone has been more kind. In the past month, just in this month alone, I've had two random people that I've never even seen their faces pay for my McDonald's drive-through order on two separate occasions. Never has happened to me in my life, and the first time it had was like almost a month ago, and it happened again the second time. And in general, I feel like people have been more kind, and I'm not sure if it's also because of my mindset. I'm more sensitive to the kindness now that I'm actually more aware of it, especially that I'm given a neurotic person. So naturally, I can be inclined to the negativity, and now that I'm more open towards the positivity, now I see it more often, and I still see the negativity. Don't get me wrong, and sometimes I'm also guilty of, thinking like, oh my god, it's 5 minutes. Like I've been waiting 5 minutes. It's supposed to be fast. It's normally like 2 minutes. Like what the hell's going on? And then like I think like what's the point? It's not helping. Why do I need to attach all this emotion? So it's hard for me to say. Hell, even yesterday, I was going to pick up my girlfriend, and I was picking up Starbucks for us, and I was gonna be 20 minutes early, and I am waiting in line for 25 minutes while waiting for my order to finally be finished for 25 minutes. So I was 5 minutes late, and the whole time I was like I was getting frustrated, but I was also laughing at myself, being like, oh my god, I was gonna be early, but now I'm late. But if I took that energy with me, then I would have had a much worse time. Instead, I just laughed it off, and it became a positive experience. So I think, of course, it's still out there. And of course, people are stressed out for many different reasons. So there are some situations where I guess, especially financial struggles, or with the changes we have and the fact that inflation's like rising, house market, all of that for sure has an impact. So maybe for some people it has, but in my experience, I've noticed the world get kinder.
Yeah, I don't want to discredit how much what's happening in the world may be taking a toll on people. I'm sure that's the case, but to your point, I think you're emphasizing the same thing, which is it's times like these where kindness is needed more than ever. Not the other way around, right? It's when we're low we need to really go high, and I think this is a great opportunity to do that. There's a common comparison that gets done in the business world, which is the idea of either being aggressive or assertive, right? And there's a lot of people that think they're being assertive, but they're being aggressive, and vice versa. And I think that it's worth highlighting that there's a lot of ability to be assertive in situations without needing to be disrespectful, without needing to lose that kindness element. And I'll give you an example. When Priya and I were down in Vancouver, we got a rental. We got a nice Jeep Wrangler, and when we received the Jeep Wrangler, the first thing we noticed is that hey, we probably should top up the gas because we're going to go on a long drive, and it makes sense to get as much gas as we can. So we found the closest gas station, and as we were pulling up to it, I remember I was like a little bit skeptical because it didn't look like the most polished gas stations, and I've watched enough horror movies to know what could go wrong. But I said, hey, we don't have a lot of time. Let's just pull up and see what happens. And we went ahead and pulled up to the gas station, and I started trying to like top up the gas. And as we were trying to fill up the gas, the machine immediately spoke up and said, "Hey, we got to pay inside first." So I'm waiting, as I'm waiting, Priya and her sister and her friend was there as well. They go inside to pay for the gas, and I'm watching the car in front of me, which was a beautiful Porsche Cayenne, and this older lady was struggling to figure out why her gas tank wasn't working, and I could tell she was struggling. She was looking back at the screen, she was looking back at the vehicle, she was pressing buttons, nothing was coming out. She was very clearly struggling, and no one was helping her. On the other side, another nice car pulls up, and this guy is getting very hasty because he's having to wait a long time. And he eventually storms inside as well. And I'm wondering what the heck is going on. Everybody went inside, no one's coming back out. So I said, instead of just waiting, why don't I just give this old lady a hand? She's trying to figure out what's going on. So I walked up and said, "Hey, miss, can I give you a hand?" And she was so thrilled. You could tell like she was like embarrassed that she couldn't figure out how to top up her car. But I said, "Hey, not a problem. Let's figure out what's going on." And as I was trying to figure out what was going on, I realized that she actually did everything correctly, and that it was the gas tank that wasn't working, and that there was another issue that was happening. So I said, "You know what? Give me a second. Let me go inside and get you some help." And as I went in, I saw the other guy that left his car in a hasty way was actually like aggressively saying like, "How long do I need to wait? I've been waiting so long for some assistance." And I see that Priya and friends are still like waiting in line for their turn. So I decided to step in. I said, "Hey, miss, come take a walk with me. Like, let's figure this out so that we can quickly figure this out." And she came out with me. The worker came out with me, took a look at the old lady gas tank, figured it out, helped her fix it, and they started topping it up. She then went and assisted the guy. The old lady was thanking me as she was taking off, and I was just happy. I was like, "Hey, I think we solved a lot of problems." Now, what was interesting is now I'm getting in my car to leave along with our friends. And as I turn on my car, I get notified by the old lady who is about to leave that there's a lot of smoke coming out of the front of my car. And I was like, could this be any more of a nightmare? Like, I was laughing with them. I was like, how many things can go wrong in this one gas station setting? Like, I'm getting nervous. And, we're about to go on a long drive. And I know that if I don't resolve this, we're gonna have a lot of issues, and it's a rental, and I don't want to have to pay for a Wrangler that's smoking up. And it was because I was helping the old lady and the server or the worker that they all stuck around to kind of help. The worker was calling a manager to come and check it out, and all these assistants came in along the way. And at the very end, we were able to take off, and we all were happy, and we left. And it's important to point out that it didn't come out of saying, "I'm kind and I'm gonna wait, and I'm gonna wait for someone to figure out the lady's situation. I'm gonna wait for someone to figure out the guy's situation. I'm gonna wait for someone to just solve my problem." The kind person would say, "Let me keep my mouth shut." But I'm saying, be assertive. Like, take a stand, but you can still achieve it in a kind way. You can go up and help someone with their situation. If someone is clearly not in the right headspace and they seem like they're stressed, try to figure out what's going on and provide assistance. In that McDonald's, going back to that story, I think there was a lot of opportunity to just go up and be like, "Hey, my sandwich is wrong. Can you actually fix it?" Or just wondering, I've been waiting for 5 minutes. Like, are you going to help me? I think that would have gotten them a lot further. And who knows, maybe even a free McFlurry or something just for being polite. But it's guaranteed that there'd be more benefit if they approached it in a kind way than the way that they did otherwise.
I think we get wrapped up in our own egos so much, and again, like those two situations in McDonald's, it comes from a place of entitlement where an expectation. I expect this outcome in the way that it should be because I'm this person or whatever. And I think this extends to like a lot of situations in general where you kind of expect the best because you're you, and you don't realize that everyone else is their own conscious being that has their own rich life story that you don't know anything about, or maybe you might even know some of it but not the whole thing. When you approach things like that, like, to me it sounds like you were being a leader in a very kind way, and yeah, we can say assertive as well, because it was, you kind of knew what you wanted to do, and you did it in a way that wasn't hostile, and it wasn't being a pushover either. You could have, again, when you went in to help, the elderly woman, I think it was, you could have waited as well, and that could have been a passive way. But instead of being aggressive like the other guy, you actually just like cut right in and tried to sort out the situation. So I think it's important to lead by example and to be the change you want for the world within yourself, and then to practice that. And it goes back to what we're talking about, the intuition and finding what you want and like this feels right to do. Because in a sense, you had that internal compass telling you this is the right thing to do. This is what I want for the world. I want the best outcomes, and you can see that there are consequences to the fact that the world's not in order in that particular statement, in that particular situation, because the woman is not able to fill up her gas tank. That it's causing all these problems where people are waiting and people are becoming aggressive, and instead you ended up being that piece for other people because you were trying to create some order in that. And I can see that you want to say something, so I'll let you cut it.
No, I was just gonna say like this ties into what we started with at the very beginning, which is leaving the world better than we came in with. Like I wanted to leave that gas station better than we came in with, right? And I think it was a big deal. And one of the things we notice over and over again is just the fact that legacy, when you think about legacy and you see it being celebrated, you often find it first celebrated on like the media, right? Social media or on television. And naturally you kind of picture legacy being like the celebrity status, right? Like when late Michael Jackson passed away, they did a 1 week tribute of his best moments. When the incredible Kobe Bryant passed away, like they did a massive tribute for him. But I think legacy doesn't need to be of that magnitude. Like legacy, in that gas station, I thought about what does my girlfriend think of me if I just stood here and let all this happen, right? I think about like what do I think of myself letting all this stuff happen, and I also think about the fact that your legacy could be at the end of the day the people that show up on your funeral, and the people that show up in your funeral are the people that are closest to you. What do you want them to think about you? And to me, that's where the word kindness really heavily speaks. Like I want, I always phrase it as being someone that lends a helping hand. And I think the beautiful thing about lending a helping hand is it doesn't need to be big or small. It's just did you do it or not? And I think that comes back with what I believe in kindness. Is like I want to leave this planet knowing that I was able to live my best life in the kindest way possible. And every interaction that I've had with people, my favorite compliment in the world is when I hear that the first thing they say is that I was a nice guy. And the terminology nice guy is something we used to resent because of the fact that it was getting berated in the world of dating and asking a girl out, right? Being a nice guy. But I love the mindset of being a nice guy. I think the fact that you can add value to someone's life, even an ounce of happiness in an interaction that they had of you, is one of the best superpowers that you can ever have. And being that I was raised in a way that didn't see that, whether it was within the way I was raised in my household or the way that I saw my secondary family or my friends, being that I worked at jobs in the past that I've seen people being mistreated, I'm excited about the fact that I'm seeing results come out of kindness and happiness. And I think that needs to be louder than it's ever have, which is at the end of the day, my type of legacy that I want to leave behind. I'd love to get your thoughts around when you think of as dark and savage as it sounds, the Camille funeral, right? Like your closest of the closest come together. What does that conversation look like in your mind based on how you think you've been leaving your legacy thus far?
Oh, like thus far versus what I want. I think.
Actually, what you just said there was a great response, which is I want to hear both because you're right. That could change quite dramatically because you're a man on a mission, right? You may
Yeah,
not be there yet.
yeah, absolutely. So I think right now, thus far, like, I would, I think people would be talking about all that potential that wasn't realized. I think that's the main part. I'm at a stage of my life right now where I'm still acquiring skills rather than being at the stage where I'm able to use those to help people. And I'm making my way towards that, of course, but that takes time and I have to be patient. I think people will talk about me in a way that I hope in a positive way. A lot of people I feel will talk about me that I was very vulnerable and that I had maybe a tough life, and I think the people that know me the most will know that despite that, like I still persevered somehow. So I think I'll get respected for that resilience I have. And people that don't know me may, or people that know me as well, will talk about the the unfortunate parts of my life and how it could have been better. I think people will talk more about that. And like you say, people won't remember what you think, but how you made them feel. So I hope that it's a positive way. I think for my closest, for the people around me, the closest ones, I think I did leave at least a positive impact in the sense that they will remember how I feel, and I really hope that they'll remember me as someone that was this calming kind of presence and being able to help them through things and kind of that peace. And that is what I want to translate to everyone there, everyone that goes there. So in the future, I would want just that. That I want to be remembered for someone that's tried really hard and their hardest actually, and did their best to spread as much joy and peace. And I want to be that kind of person for others that is their, for lack of a better word, the rock. You know, that person they could always come back to for either advice or help, or they know that they can rely on me in a way that would be kind of giving. Giving who I am and who I would want to be is that source of, just contentment, if you will. And I'm curious about your take because I know you've described it a little bit, but the thus far versus who you want, I think is an interesting topic to explore for yourself as well.
Yeah, I definitely want to spend more time on this, even if it's the remainder of our time. This is such a beautiful topic. I loved your answer, man. There's something I'm troubled with in your answer, but I love where you are and where you're headed, which is the fact that your initial answer was like, hey, I think people will see it as like untapped potential or like what more you could have done. But the sad part and the morbid part is that we never really know how long this life of ours is going to go on for. And being that you feel like you're not there or you're not even close, is that it results in what I fear a lot of elderly people that haven't really done a lot with their life have, which is a regret that they wish they did more. And I feel like that's not what I'd want to think about in my last second, right? And I think about what is it that I could be doing now? Because the answer is you could always do more, right? You could always do more, but can you still be building that same North Star legacy even in the scale that you are now? And then what's increasing is the magnitude, not necessarily the direction or the North Star. And I think of it that way. We talked about metric earlier. If Oprah said 1 million people she wanted to help, let's say unfortunately her life didn't allow her to reach out to 1 million people, which we know gratefully she has. Um, would she say I failed that I've only impacted 800,000 people? I don't think so, right? Like I think she'd be like I impacted 800,000 people, and that's kind of how I'm kind of living my life between who I am now versus who I can be, which is I feel like I can definitely do more, and I feel like there's a lot of room to be able to build that empire. But I also feel like what I'm doing right now gives me that feeling of, am I still doing it down to the core? Because there's, what we're kind of thinking of is like what we're doing, but what we're thinking about present is who we're being. And I think that who I'm being will stay consistent every step of the way, which is, am I being someone that's lending a helping hand? Am I being someone that's kind? Am I being someone that is constantly pouring into the world without expectation? And if I'm being that, that's just an ongoing thing that no matter at what age, if I even dropped today and it ended, I'd still feel like I would spend my last second thinking, was I being that person that I wanted to be every step of the way while I'm doing what I'm trying to do? And I think that narrative is important to have along the way, or else you're always getting this feeling of anxiousness, right? Like I'm still not there. I hope I don't die tomorrow because I hope I'm not there yet, right? So I feel like there's that level of thinking that I really do want you to think about, because I praise you a lot on this show, and even with the amount I praise you on this show, it's not even close to the amount that I really, really do praise you when we're together in person, because I really want you to know every day and every interaction that we have of how much of an impact you make to me. And the things that you say that you hope to be able to do, and the things that you say that you hope that people will say about you, are things that I would already say today while you're alive. And I try to, what's that saying? Give them the roses while they're still alive. Like I want to give you those roses every single day and remind you that you are pouring into me every single day. You are always giving me value. A big part of why I'm the happiest that I've ever been in my life is as a credit of what you've been pouring into me as an individual. So that consistency and ongoing thing that you do every single day by being who you are, I think it needs to be highlighted very, very, very highly, because if you were not in this picture, my life would not be the same. Like, think about how big of an impact that must be.
Yeah.
Not even close to being the same. Because not only did I meet you, that resulted in me hanging around with a giant group of friends for a big part of my life, but the relationships I went through, the learnings that I've got from this relationship, the conversations you and I have, the mindset shifts, and this podcast show, even none of that would have happened if we didn't meet. So to me, the monumental impact is far more significant, where it's not about did I make it to that destination, is did I make an impact during the travel. And when I released, when we released a productivity journal that I called Journey to My Best Self with Priya, I like the word journey to my best self, and I held on to that. And, I got to give Priya credit. I think it was really her that came up with it. But the reason that it rang in the back of my head is because the irony of that statement is so beautiful, because you never get to your best self. And the life is actually the journey, not the best self. So when you're on the journey to your best self, it's this never ending journey. And as long as you love the journey and really take in every step of the way, although you never get to your destination, you really feel like you lived a fulfilled life. And that's my perspective around that. And hopefully in some ways it makes you think of it that way as well.
I think so as well. I think, well, first of all, thank you for sharing all that. I understand what you mean because the way I am, I do feel that it is radiating that same message that, or maybe feelings that I hope people receive. I There are some barriers, I guess, in conventional terms, like in working with society, that I'm still waiting for, a piece of paper to tell me, well, to allow me to actually do that in a professional setting, and that does affect me, uh, especially in the way that, of course, I try to do that with the people important to me, and I naturally spread that out. I have these limitations within myself, of course, of my own self esteem, if you will, sure, of my own, well, like societal limitations, and naturally, my own mind. I've worked on my mind so hard that I think it took a really long time to learn how to separate from that, and learning how to separate from that, like, it's still an ongoing process. Don't get me wrong, but I definitely can feel more intuition now that the more and more I separate from that, and the more I do that, the more I am in tune with who I am, and the more I can spread that out. So I have all this progress that I'm grateful for, and all of these experiences that I've shared and lived that I'm okay with passing, even if it's tomorrow. And I'm aware that I'm giving that piece, and of course my language is the way it is because I do have that, maybe not insecurity, that anxiety that it's not enough, and I mean that in a sense. It's not enough for me to be satisfied, and I have to learn to accept that it never will be. And that is also a challenge in itself, to actually have that acceptance and to live that legacy knowing that you're just handing off the torch at the end of the day. You're not actually able to see the fruits of your own labor. Like, I imagine Elon Musk, for instance, wants to go and colonize Mars, and he's aware he won't do it in his lifetime. I mean, to let go of that and be like, at least I'm working towards as close as possible to that legacy, is something I'm struggling with. The challenge to let go of that, for sure.
It's incredible to think that he's still working, Elon Musk, at max speed, creating this efficiency for other people that will probably land on Mars and not him. And that doesn't stop him. And that doesn't stop his ambition and belief, because I've seen it in a past fireside chat that he did on stage, where he was talking about the fact that he believes that we have a small window to be able to make this transition, and he wants to do everything that he can in his lifetime to let us take advantage of that window. And that's kind of a beautiful thing, where that I think that some people have around, the idea of having offsprings, right? Like when they have kids, it's kind of like you're planting the seeds now so that your kids could have a better future. or you're planting the seeds now so that someone else could benefit from it, if not even you or your family. So it's kind of like the legacy that far exceeds your lifetime, which is literally what the legacy is, right? It's memories, thoughts, and ideas and execution that actually benefits far beyond your own lifetime and sometimes forever. And we've seen that with social movements. We've seen that with literal products and innovations and inventions that we have. The fact that you and I are on a Zoom call right now, like think about the fact that someone had to invent electricity, a computer, the internet, Zoom, make a faster computer, faster internet, give us a great microphone. Like all these happen so that you and I can release an episode and then put it out on these platforms that was also invented by someone else. It's like this never-ending foundation that's allowing people to better the world. And to me, that's such a big part of it. The fact that I see value in efficiencies, right? Creating efficiencies for the world in some way. And the efficiencies doesn't always need to be a practical giveaway. It doesn't need to be a physical, tangible giveaway. It could sometimes be the way that people think that makes them act differently. And I was thinking about this based on a conversation I had with someone, and I'd love to get your take on this, which is, I shared a different perspective on something I disagreed with, and I usually do that, right? And it's not because I'm looking to disagree. It's because if I disagree, I'd like to throw my ideas in the ring and see if they can change my mind. Because to me, I'm curious if I'm in the wrong. And after I shared my thoughts around it, the person, she looked at me and she said, "You don't have to always be a rebel." And I thought that was such an interesting perspective because I was like, is that how I'm appearing? Like when I think about modern mindset, it's in some ways that may push people to think like, okay, these guys are being rebellious because they're saying the mindset is not the correct one. So they should be a more modern way of thinking. And in some ways, I understand that. I really believe that there is an ideology that we're appearing like rebels that are always constantly challenging the way people think. But I don't necessarily think that's the positioning that I'm trying to take in this world. Like, I don't think I'm trying to be a rebel in this world. I'm not someone that is a seeker of problems and saying we need to fix this and this, or in every conversation, I'm looking for my opportunity to disagree. What I find myself doing more often than not is I really want people to be happy at their happiest by being the person they want to be, not by the person they were taught to be. And the word unbecome comes back and resurfaces because I think about the fact that I don't think a lot of people realize of how much conditioning has prevented them from being able to do that. And only by unbecoming and getting rid of or reassessing the conditioning that you've done can you really identify, is this truly what you want down to your core? When I was engaged 4 years ago, I remember this memory very specifically. We went out to a Chinese restaurant, and I think you were in Poland at this time. And then we went out with some of our mutual friends, and I sat around and I was trying to justify without actually making it look like a justification. I was like bragging, like, what's awesome about her? You know what's great about this relationship? You know what's great about her family? I was throwing all these things into the ring, and I realize now that I was doing what I think most of us does is when we do something that we know deep down is wrong, we use logic to try to justify to make us sleep better at night. We try to justify that, hey, these things are actually the right decision. And sometimes you're really reaching, like you're trying to find the 10th item that may be a positive item in this situation that you're in. And you're saying that's the reason why I'm doing it. And it sometimes justifies it. And then you allow yourself to sleep better at night. And unfortunately, down the road, you actually believe that. It wasn't until the lockdown period where I spent a lot of time with you over the last 12 to 15 months that I feel like I've really spent time unpacking everything that I've experienced over the last 4 years. And one thing that I've really highlighted was the fact that I was lying to myself. I was giving myself false beliefs to justify bad gut feelings that I was getting. And I was trying to sell that to other people just as much as I was trying to sell it to myself. And I think that's where I really wanted to bring that component back, is not trying to be a rebel, but really assessing like the stories that you're feeding yourself in the back of your mind. Is there validity to that? Or are you using that to disguise the fact that you're not happy? Because if you're not, it's an opportunity to change. And I think that's the idea that I'm pushing more than anything else. Do you feel like you are Captain Hook pulling up in a pirate ship as this rebel trying to change the world and their way of thinking? I'm curious to get your thoughts around if someone said to you like, hey, Camille, you don't always have to be a rebel. What are your thoughts around that?
I've actually been called that a couple times too, that I always take the contrary stance just for the sake of playing devil's advocate. I agree with you firmly, though. Like, I spent a majority of my life trying to fit myself into the standards that were placed upon me, as opposed to making my life fit into who I am. And as a result, that create like so all this anxiety and all this drama that ends up making me unhappy and miserable. And in fact, it doesn't leave the world in a better place because I'm limited. I have all these limitations that are arbitrary because, like, sure, they've been passed down, and tradition is important, culture is important. However, when it doesn't fit for you, and it isn't the best way of your own being, then naturally, why why not adopt a better way? In the same way that you talk about, we're inclined to make things better and to, sure, we've evolved to actually predict problems and to actually sort them out. Like, that's always what we've been doing, is trading the present for the future. So why not? And I mean, I think it's a lazy way to say you don't always have to be the rebel. It's like, but why can't I ask this question? That's a complete misstep, and that's not the right way to go about it, because instead of actually, you know engaging you in that conversation or engaging the idea, it was more attaching a label to you, and then now you have to fight off the label. And instead of instead of actually seeing what the person believes, it ends up being like this kind of internal and external, like, power struggle in a sense with that identity. So I don't think that's the right way to go about it. If they really were justified in the way they feel and the way they think, then they would have engaged that idea on the basis of the idea and presented a better option. When you described what you said, that, like, unbecoming and realizing that you've been lying to yourself all this time because of these standards that are placed on you that you're not even aware of half the time, I still feel the same way, where there are even things that I realize, of course, you have to teach your children, and of course, you have to learn how to function as a member of society in a way that is productive. You can't just, like, do rude things. You can't just steal. You can't just mistreat people. You have to learn how to handle that part. And I do firmly believe that naturally people are good in that regard. And, there are exceptions, of course. When you can be that kind of person that benefits society, even without being limited or even controlled by the way you act from it, I think that's where you have the most genuine change for the world, and the most authentic version of yourself helping the world is the most efficient way of doing that. And when you can spread that out and propagate that ideas, whether it's with spreading your message longer, whether it's just being that source of your authenticity, whatever your purpose is, to your immediate surroundings, or even extending that further, or whether it's creating, creating, whether it's having children and spreading those ideas and those core values for the future to reap from the benefits of. I think that is essentially the purpose. Is learning how to function in society is important for upbringing, especially as children, and then learning how to detach yourself from that and being able to use that as a tool and pick it up when you need it and pick it up when you don't, or drop it off when you don't, is such an important lesson for everyone, and in fact creates the most amount of synchronicity within yourself and your sub personalities, if you will, to create that peace, to create all that forward momentum, and to be in the flow state. So why not challenge people when it seems like they don't really hold that opinion, or they're not actually living in a way that is productive to that? I think what you're doing is extending that helping hand, because, like, not a lot of people get challenged, and not a lot of people realize that what they're doing is just automatic.
And the ask questions component too. And I think about how many people stray away from asking questions, and I really want that the boldness and the underline I put on this to be the emphasis, which is the fact that don't feel like asking questions is ever a bad thing. Right now, it's an opportunity for you to really get a grasp of why you're doing what you're doing. The idea of asking questions have been very heavily put down, because you think about the fact that if you're in a job and you ask too many questions, you're going to look like an idiot that doesn't know what they're doing. or you're going to be the annoying one that keeps raising your hand in a classroom and asking questions, or the fact that people are going to like be offended by the fact that you ask questions about something that people very strongly believe in. And I think that's scaring a lot of people from speaking up. But when you start worrying that asking questions is going to put you in some way, you really need to take a hard look at your ego and put it in check, because it's that ego component that's kind of making you worry and saying, hey, this is going to hurt me if you make yourself look weak, like pretend you know what you're doing or speak up. And I think that's a very important mind shift that needs to happen in order to really be able to strive. And I think that's what we're encouraging with our show more than anything else, is don't be afraid to ask questions, especially if you don't understand or you disagree with it. This was a big challenge for me when I in my upbringing from a religious family. Like asking questions would raise a lot of eyebrows in my community. You know, a lot of people would be like, "Oh, this is sinful. The fact that you're doubting, you know, that you shouldn't be doubting this. You should trust it." And I would never get answers, and I found it hard to commit very strongly to something I didn't understand, which seems very logical, but you think about how often that happens, right? It's like a lot of us commit into something and we don't fully understand it. There's nothing wrong with asking questions. And we live in a time where it's easier than it's ever been to get those answers. And if it's not answers, at least get good opinions. And those good opinions can help us formulate a better conclusion than it would have if we didn't have any answers at all, which I think is such a big piece. And if people just asked questions and thought about things in a more critical way, I don't think it's about being a rebel. I think it's really about giving yourself a fair chance to decide if these are the things that you want to pursue it. Camille, what does it mean if someone came up to you and said, I don't know what my legacy is. I don't know what I want to do in this life. Where do I start? You know, you and I kind of took a stab at what we hope to achieve, and I was really impressed with our answers. And knowing you, I think I fully believe your answer. Not only that, do you mean it? The fact that you're well on your way there, like you're really delivering on that promise every day I see you. What do you do with someone that says, I'm not sure what my legacy is? I'm not sure what I want out of this life. Like, are there some critical questions or things that they could do in order to at least get closer to that North Star?
I recently came across this kind of worksheet from from someone, and I think it's a perfect way to start. Is you take a piece of paper or maybe a couple, and you write down what is wrong with the world. And of course, naturally, you're going to come up with all these sorts of reasons. But you keep going until at the very end, you're going to notice some new things about yourself. And when you look at that, you can kind of feel the kind of shift into this makes sense. This actually is worth pursuing. And ask yourself, if I pursue this, what do I have to sacrifice? And is that worth the sacrifice? I think that's a huge component to that. And then you can ask yourself, what's the next step? And what am I doing to position myself to the next step? Just that exercise alone, I think is huge. You can also call upon past experience and just be like, what has felt right to me? What has felt wrong? Is what I'm doing right or wrong? And that comes back to the intuition, which is very hard to define once again. So I think a good exercise would to be actually writing it down. What feels right or what is wrong with the world, and then just paying very close attention to what you're actually writing, and of course sticking with it, because naturally there's going to be like little things like cars break down, or like arbitrary little small things that aren't exactly what your purpose may be. Or maybe I'm wrong, maybe it is. Maybe you're going to find out your purpose is to create and discover the next thing that will repair that. So I naturally would tell them that first. And I'd probably say it in a way that doesn't make it seem like a simple problem, because this is really complicated actually. But I think that's a good first step. And I'm wondering if you have any advice to people like that.
Yeah, and really quickly, asking for the listeners, but more selfishly for myself, that worksheet that you're referencing, is that something that's publicly available? And if so, what would someone need to search in order to find that?
But it's not publicly available. I think it's part of Dr. K's guide. So you'd have to purchase the program, and I can't remember where it is exactly. So Sorry.
We'll need to double check that and maybe throw it into the description. I think we'll figure that out for our listeners. I think there's a lot of value in looking into that. Now we talked about a couple things in the first two chapters, and for those of you that are maybe listening to the Modern Mindset for the first time, it's worth doing a full circle and coming back in from chapter one and two again, because one thing we said there, I think very much comes back to what we're saying right now to answer this individual's question, which is how do I figure out what I want to do in this world? Well, I think there's value in tasting first, right? And we talked about this in chapter two with better experiences, is that some people have become very, very good at what they do at a very young age. Olympic level athletes, for example, world famous singers and painters. And we think about like why they were able to get there. And we talked very heavily about the fact that they probably had an opportunity to taste it at a very young age. And something in their mind, body, and as we call it, intuition, pulled them towards it, saying this is what they want to do. And they probably went all in on their passion with that around that sport or activity. Well, this comes back to that as well, is I think the more you get to taste and experience, and in chapter one, the more conversations that you have, you start getting certain feelings inside of you. You start the mind is such a complicated yet beautiful thing that is calculating a lot of these ideas being thrown into it, and it gives you this type of output that makes you think, hey, maybe I need to assess this a bit more. Sometimes I find that when you and I spend time on a podcast jamming about something, I go back and I YouTube a video that made me think about like what you said, or I'll look it up and I'll read an article about it. And that happened based on the fact that you threw a bunch of ideas that spiked something inside of me that said, hey, I want to learn a little bit more about this. And I think in many ways, this will help you with that legacy component as well. Is that, I didn't always know that this is what I wanted to do. I didn't always know that lending a helping hand, living a life of kindness, trying to become my better self every single day, I didn't know those were big pillars in my life. It's somewhere along the way through experiences and conversations that I really felt like it was coming together. And here's the other part. It may keep evolving. Like 5 years from now, my answer may be different, which to put you at ease, if you're not sure about what it is that you want to do in this world, feel good knowing that you don't have to have the right answer right now. In fact, there may not even be a right answer. It may just be an evolving answer. And the having a North Star as of now allows you to head down a direction rather than being standstill. I think the only thing worse than taking a stand is actually going to your grave and not taking a stand at all. And I think I would rather be wrong than be indecisive. And I think being able to make a decision and then recalibrate it based on more and more information will help you get there. The evolution of my North Star and my legacy has come out of conversations that would constantly change my mind or enhance my way of thinking. So by going through these experiences, it changes and evolves over time. And the way I describe it, I'm at peace knowing that if I change my mind, it's for the right reasons. And if I'm at peace with that, which comes back to also the fact that we lie to ourselves with false logic, I put that side of me on check. I make sure that if I'm changing my mind, I'm not lying to myself about why I'm changing my mind. I'm changing my mind for the right reasons, for the right information that I received. And therefore, I feel a lot more confident going all in on it every single time.
That is extremely important to describe too. Like what you were talking about made me think about like also like examining your core values, just seeing what you're grounded towards and like expanding on that. How can you use those core values in a way that you would be like best suited for? And by doing so, you can create that legacy that you're looking for. I think talking about metrics as well, like I don't think that may be the most helpful way. Like you mentioned before, you just had to have that mode of being and then just let that naturally evolve and compound over time with just being as honest and having integrity with yourself. It will naturally evolve. And like you said, a lot of times it just changes. Like I recently discovered that within this year, spirituality is a huge core value of mine. Like, and that was within this year, and I'm 29 years old. It's crazy to think that my whole life I didn't know that about myself, and it just took a couple experiences. It took a lot of curiosity, a lot of thinking, and a lot of experiencing actually. And through that, it could have been conversations, which I heavily attribute your help for that, for letting me uh, discuss and think out loud, and actually having that kind of challenge within myself that naturally sparked that curiosity and allowed me to discover that. I think it's important to have that little bit of stepping out of your comfort zone and being okay with where you are now, just focusing on the next step. And like you say, if you don't have any path, if you don't know the direction, any path will take you there. So just committing to something and at least trying it, you can always recalibrate. And like you so beautifully mentioned a couple episodes before, sometimes the end goal isn't to have it be successful. Even with your unsuccessful adventures, you can learn skills that were meant to teach you. And sometimes, like we described with many failed relationships, sometimes it wasn't about it succeeding that was important to you. What was important for you were the lessons obtained from that. And unfinished projects can be the same way. So it's very difficult to say. I think I think everyone does have a unique purpose, and like there's just some things that that call on to you because you don't choose what you're interested in. So I think really paying attention to that is also important, and that's why I always stress writing down and actually journaling is a very effective way to do that, especially if you can't really discuss it or think it out loud with someone else. I think that's the next best thing.
Yeah, the idea of measuring can be defined in so many ways, and I sometimes worry about diving into the measurement component because it could scare people off because not a lot of people have a measurement or a metric. And you know what? I don't have a forward-looking metric. I have a reflection metric, which I'll talk about in a second. But like the forward thing is a little scary, right? Because you're always anxious about are you moving towards your goal. But I also think about like what does a metric mean from a standpoint that puts you at peace that you're okay with where you are right now. And one of them being the fact that people talk about a another common quote, which is um, be better today than you were yesterday, right? And that's a good indicator, which is like you're looking back and saying, am I better? Yeah, okay, I'm on the right track. And as I always say, 1% better, right? Like if we're getting 1% better every day, we're going to be incredible by the end of the year and then incredible by the end of our lifetime. And that 1% better every day gets me amped because number one, like if you think about what 1% better every day is, it's such a small goal, but it results in you moving forward. It's almost hard to only get 1% better if you're trying to get better. You're gonna naturally be higher. So it's like you're all you're really doing is giving yourself the incentive to keep moving forward and feel good about the fact that you did. And I think there's a lot of value in actually trying to strive for something like that. A worthy metric, even if it doesn't have a number, is a question to just ask yourself, which is whatever North Star or legacy that you just put up in the back of your mind as this, let's say, your current existing metric or your current existing North Star, which means that it could change. Are you doing the things that is resulting in heading down that way? Right? Like, are your actions lining up with your ambition? And if it's not, then that's a very quick indicator that you're not actually doing the right things. For me, a big part of it, I ask myself, like, why do we have this podcast show? And I think about the fact that if I drop dead today and I left this planet and I could never speak and share an idea today, there's still 10 chapters out there in the world, plus so much more other content I put up there that's going to allow people to hear the way I think and still maybe be able to make that impact long after I leave. Same with my book. Same with my other podcast shows. Same with the fact that I get up on stage. Same with the fact that I post on social media. These are questions that I've asked myself. I've asked myself, are the things that I'm doing lining up with the ambition that I put up there to build a legacy that I want to build? So I think the backward looking metric will allow you to really ask yourself the right questions. And it always comes back to asking yourself questions. Are you asking yourself the right question to figure out whether or not you're doing the right thing? And if you are, feel good knowing that that idea may change, but the actions are still lined up with who you are today and what you want to do.
I think as well a major barrier to that is a lot of people are just like you mentioned as well aren't honest with themselves. In fact, they're so out of practice with being honest, even outwardly, that they can't even trust the voice that calls upon them because they're just so they built up that circuitry of lying all the time. And once you start accepting your own lies, then you lead like a very difficult life. So I think, in that same regard, practicing honesty outwardly, like tell yourself, try to make it your mission not to lie today. Just see what happens, and then from there, maybe you're going to notice that the way you talk to yourself is differently. You're going to feel a lot more strong because you're able to put yourself out there and realize that you're actually able to take on the consequence of being you authentically. And then from there, you can ask yourself more and more questions if you find that you can't, if you're not getting honest answers. And maybe it's so hard to, well, it's easy to say and harder to do because your mind's really good at tricking yourself. Like, think of every time your ego gets bruised, there's some logical explanation for how it doesn't matter anyway, or that you're better than that, when really it's just masking the hurt and just shoving it down, and it's not being helpful whatsoever. So I think it's important to, when you're feeling lost, is to find a way to ground yourself again. And for me, trying to be as honest as possible has been such a huge tool. And sometimes it's to my detriment, but when it's to my detriment, I learn a lot. And to be honest, it's an adventure. Like, it really is, because I honestly don't know what's going to happen. I can take the safe answer, and I can pretty much expect that it's going to be a safe response. But as soon as I be honest, I honestly don't know what happens, and I don't even have to remember what happens, because I think it's so exhausting having to keep up with all the lies you tell yourself or even to the world around, that it's not worth it. So, yeah, I think, what you describe is so beautiful in saying that, like, ask yourself the right questions. It's about asking yourself the right questions, but also being able to trust your answers, because if those answers are coming from a dishonest place, then you can ask all the right questions, but not get the right answer.
And it gets even more dangerous when you believe those false answers and you run with it for a long period of time, where it really starts becoming part of your day to day, which I think is terrifying. I really love that this is a episode 10 special, because if you really think about a lot of areas that we're covering, a lot of them is a callback to many of the 9 chapters that we released out there. Like the idea that you're saying around honesty, I would add to that practicing gratitude every day allows you to identify those traits. Like waking up every morning saying, what am I grateful for? And it's usually at those moments that you're like, I'm grateful that I did better today than yesterday. I'm grateful that I'm starting to see change. I'm grateful that I made this person's day. I'm grateful that I added this. So, like, you're giving yourself the lane to think about those areas. And I think, again, for our new listeners or individuals that may not have heard our past, it's very, very much worth going back and really seeing how much we dive into those, because it does definitely add to everything we're talking around with the conversation of legacy. So, Camille, as we wrap this up, I'm gonna put you to a challenge here, okay? Because we're at chapter 10, which means now we're in double digit club, and I want to pitch to our listeners why it's worth subscribing and continuing to listen to our podcast. Meaning, what's coming up next? Like we have our YouTube channel, which I see today that we had a couple comments. We had a couple live viewers, which is always beautiful to see. And if you're watching us on YouTube, we love you for it. And we encourage you to hit the subscribe button so that you get notified every single time we go live, which is every Sunday that we've been doing consistently. And if you're an audio listener, if you're listening on Spotify, iTunes, or any other streaming platform, please do also subscribe and follow us so that you get notified. And if you do really get any value from this show, we would greatly appreciate it if you write a review. As you may have seen in past chapters, we read the reviews out loud because it really means the world to us. But Camille, for the ones that are listening that are maybe hovering their finger above the follow button saying, I'm not sure why I should follow these guys, give them a pitch, man. What do you hope to see? I know this has been such an organic, beautiful show that came to life by itself over the last 10 chapters, but what do you hope to see in the next 10?
I hope the next 10 you see an even further progression to being more authentically ourselves and being able to share these kind of maybe intuitions that you yourself or the listeners out there actually know deep within themselves but haven't been able to verbalize before, or being able to call upon consciously. And then having that aha moment can help you kind of integrate that within who you want to be and what you're aiming towards. So I'm hoping more and more we can we can bring that to light. We can bring forward who we are as people and the challenges we've experienced in becoming that to provide maybe courage, maybe some examples, maybe some insights, or maybe as even lessons on how to unlock those parts of your brain, or how to become more and more yourself, and how to question, is what I'm doing actually what I want to do, or is this just another part of the programming that I'm not even aware of? I want us to be able to, well, we have been, but even further so, challenge this kind of paradigm that we've been constantly being okay with hearing over and over again, and realizing that these things that we tell ourselves are not always our own voices. These are just messages spread out throughout time, propagating, that have been helpful before, but are they useful to us now? And that's a very important question to ask as well. To unlock who you really are, to unlock your own mindset in this modern day world, I think is all about the individual. And the more individual you are, the more you can spread out who who you want your message towards, who you want your purpose to help. And I think by doing that, you make the world a better place and you make yourself a better you.
And that pitch was so good that we would have thought you were the marketer in this conversation. And well done. Yeah, I love what you were saying, which is going further. And I would say that if you really look back at our last handful of episodes, I think it's been fun because what we really started seeing is kind of like the evolution of ourselves as podcasters, because we went from two people that were nervous about doing this for the first time, where I would say in the last few episodes it's very evident that we're getting to this level of comfort that allows us to be more like what it would have been like if they were in person with us in a casual setting. And I think that's coming out more and more. So what the next 10 gives us a really good opportunity to do is to be share more of that, give us more of the replica of what we've been creating in person every single day. And we're growing. The viewers are evolving with us. This is our third month, meaning over the last 3 months the viewers are kind of seeing us grow together. And even today I just shared an example that happened earlier today at McDonald's, just today. And it gets me excited that we come back week after week and we bring back stories that are happening to us. We bring back new learnings, we evolve, and we go deeper. And I couldn't be more thankful to do it with anyone else, Camille. Like, your ability to dissect, your ability to reflect, your ability for critical thinking and communication, it just makes it so much easier for me to really do my part on this show. So I thank you gratefully, and I hope the viewers continue joining us for the next 10 and many more after that, because I can't wait to see what Modern Mindset evolves to in the coming years.
Yeah, thank you. And as well, I can't stress this enough how important you have been for my own development, and how you constantly inspire me to become more myself and to actually challenge the way I think and to become confident in the answers I provide you, because you're able to, as you say, check the locks on the doors that of the I forget the example of the of the house that I live in, right? So I'm able to check the locks of my mind and realize that maybe I have this incomplete picture, and you're able to provide more of that for me, and I am constantly in awe of that. So, and I'm internally grateful for it too.
Right back at you, man. Thank you so much for doing this. And for those of you that have been riding with us since episode one, we are eternally grateful. Like, we can't believe how much time you spent with us and the feedback you've given us. Thank you again for joining us today. We will be back next week to dive into chapter 11, getting into the double digits. We're really going to build out some incredible conversations for you. And we're so thankful that you tuned in. Have a great weekend. Enjoy the rest of your evening. And we hope you have another incredible week. Take care, everyone.
Recording